Hello, everyone. Welcome to Critica NYC again on our new episode on the 2020 elections and the Latinx vote. My name is Raquel Batista, and I am very honored to be joined today by two dynamic leaders who have been working and dedicate their careers to doing political work, in doing civic engagement and engaging the Latino community in New York City, but also across the United States. Today, we're joined by Natalia Salgado. She is the political director for the Center of Popular Democracy. And we're also joined by Katherine Pichardo, who is the president of the Hamilton Campaign Network. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
This is really exciting. So we have just all experienced one of the most historic elections in our lifetime in the United States, with one of the highest amount of votes that we've had, I believe, in like over 100 years in the United States. We have a declared president-elect and vice president-elect, Biden and Harris. I'm actually wearing my white today, you know, in dedication of our VP to have a first woman elected into the White House as vice president. This is huge for women all over the US, but also all over the world, especially for women of color, to be able to see someone, you know, reach this level of power. And, you know, today I really wanted us to talk about the importance of the Latinx vote. Millions of people came out to vote. Latinos are one of the biggest groups to come out to vote. 60% voted for Biden, while 40% voted for Trump. And today I'd like for us to explore the Latino vote. There's been a lot of conversation around the fact that Latinos are not a monolithic group, that we have many diverse interests, ideas, political values. Some are Democrats, some are Republicans, some are neither, all influenced by our age, race, nations that we come from, where we come from places like Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Cuba. And so, you know, I really wanted us to take the opportunity to have a conversation about the diversity of our voices, how we came to participate in such great numbers in this election, and also what does this mean for the future? What does it mean, the fact that we had this really great participation? Will the electeds deliver on issues that are of concern to Latinos when it comes to issues like immigration, housing, the economy, jobs, and other issues? So I really want to, you know, take the chance now to open up our conversation. And, you know, please introduce yourselves to our audience. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to get involved in the political process, to come to the places that you currently work in, and, you know, what you've experienced.
I think we lost her.
I think we lost her. Okay, let's make this the Natalia.
We're getting over that show now.
We got our own show.
Well, we've been waiting for this our whole lives. Oh, right. You came back, Raquel.
Yes, I'm here.
Well, we love that you are, because this is a great conversation. So I just want to say thank you for getting us together, and especially so quickly, right? We still have many, many votes to count. But ideally, it is an ongoing conversation. You know, I will say that votes don't happen in a vacuum. So yes, I am super excited about the record number of Latinos that came out to vote this election. And it's something we should definitely talk a little bit more about. And it's a testament to the work that many groups have been doing for many years to engage Latino voters. So thank you.
Thank you, Katherine. Natalia.
I'm so excited to be here, albeit a little bit tired. Natalia Salgado, Political Director for Center for Popular Democracy. Coming off of a stint where, our organization ran political campaigns in 7 key swing states across the country. And I am, ready to talk about how impressive our people have been in this election. I mean, my God, I feel like this is we're rewriting our history with the numbers that came out this election. And we should be celebrating that and shouting it from the rooftops.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that, this is our opportunity, one, to celebrate the fact that, yes, Latinos have been organizing on issues, organizing voters, turning out the vote, running for political office for years. I think that, our community is definitely impressive, from the fact that we have strongholds in New York City and, growing communities like in Pennsylvania and in Georgia. And Arizona has also had a long history of doing organizing work, doing civil rights work, bringing around pivotal issues that impact Latinos. So please, Katherine, let's start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, what you've experienced during this election cycle, the work that the Hamilton Campaign Network has done, and, what was it like on election night and really all the days after that, waiting to hear, and we're still waiting, but now we're like, kind of like in our afterglow right now.
Absolutely. And so, so I'll tell you a little bit about what we did this year. And of course, this is perhaps, and it's been said many times before, the most pivotal election of our lifetimes, right? There was a lot on the line, literally our lives. And so I think that from the perspective of being here in this historic moment, we all felt that there was a job to be done, and we all had to put to play our role and do our part, poner nuestro granito de arena, to make it work for our communities. So I'll tell you, I started my career many, many years ago at an organization called NALEO, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. And even 20 years ago, we were talking about the Latino vote and how to engage voters, right? So at the time, we understood that meant we needed to make sure that our community that was here as legal permanent residents became American citizens. And that was the first step, right? So we launched the campaign to help people become citizens. But it also meant registering them to vote. And then, of course, encouraging them to run for public office. So beyond the Latino vote being an important part of this year's elections, and it's clear from the results that our votes matter. I am also impressed with the wide breadth of Latino candidates around the country that ran for office and also won critical down ballot elections all throughout the United States. So I think that's relevant because part of what, and it's a multi-pronged approach, but part of what encourages our people to vote is also seeing people like themselves on the ballot. So as I said earlier, it's not something that happens in a vacuum. So even back then, helping to mobilize Latino voters, and then throughout a career in public service, in New York, mostly at the city council and the state senate, I came to Hamilton Campaign Network a few years back. We are a boutique New York-based firm that focuses on races that matter to our community. We are minority owned and ran, and then also, of course, women led, which I'm very excited about to have our new vice president elect. being the first woman and a woman of color at that. So this year we worked in a number of races. We were the Latino firm actually that started over a year ago, even before he announced with Vice President Biden, to help craft his messaging to our community, developing his policies around immigration and Puerto Rico, and making sure that we were not left out of the equation when it came to the economy and housing and jobs. And certainly the coronavirus pandemic has shifted some of those dynamics and really, in many ways, brought to the fore issues that we knew were already there, but that became only more relevant as a result of coronavirus. So we worked with the VP to craft all of that policy and work with him through the early races in the primary and on to Super Tuesday, where we felt there was a decisive victory. And then since then, we've been working with partners like SEIU, Latino Victory, and others on the independent side to make sure we got our people out to vote. We work closely with Center for Popular Democracy, so I'm happy to be here with Natalia on particularly the issue of Puerto Rico and helping folks on the island become sustainable and in a way that is representative of their rights to self-determination. So there's a lot of different areas in which this election will become significant. And I think moving forward, the next job for us is obviously to make sure we hold everyone accountable to our communities as we now move on to a new era here in the United States. In addition to the presidential, we also worked on a lot of down ballot races, particularly in Florida, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin. We did a lot of stuff in Pennsylvania and of course, New York, which is our home. So we're very happy with all those victories and looking forward to what comes next.
That's great, and I'm glad that you mentioned, the issue that you did a lot of work around Puerto Rico and the messaging of Puerto Rico and Puerto Rican issues. One of the infographics that really stood out to me was one where they compared the Puerto Rican vote versus the Cuban vote in Florida, where you saw like Puerto Ricans really came out to vote for Biden and didn't really vote in high numbers for Trump, whereas the Cuban community really turned out for Trump at like 70% voting for him. Natalia, I definitely, would love to hear more from you on, the work that the Center for Popular Democracy, did for this election. I know it already has a long history of doing organizing work, of working with groups, like a lot of the founders are from Make the Road in New York. I know Make the Road was doing a ton of work in Arizona and Pennsylvania and New York. And there were a number of other Latino organizations as well, like Mi Familia Vota and others. So, I definitely would love to hear a bit of your perspective on that, Natalia.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just sort of picking up on what you just said in Florida, it is an important distinction, and that we're going to have to continually name. I mean, Florida, just a deep sigh for Florida and the mystery that continues to elude us. But just to do not a reality check, but something like that. Let's get into the numbers around that, right? When you look at the sort of Cuban rich precincts in Florida, they actually voted at the same numbers that they did in 2008 around a Democrat versus a Republican. So I think that's an important distinction to make because there is always a lot of sort of rhetoric about the Cuban vote. And it is true. There's a lot of work to be done there from our side around that specific sort of demographic. But I think there is something also incredibly interesting and a bit scary about what happened with the South American vote. which is another critical Latino voting bloc in Florida. And if anything, it becomes a sort of microcosm. When you go into the sort of South American vote, if you start to peel away those layers, it becomes a microcosm of what the right did in this election, what the Trumpers did in this election, how Russia meddled in our elections. I don't know. I feel like a lot of folks probably saw this, but Politico did this very sort of great piece around the misinformation that was happening across the country with Latinos. And in Florida, that was illustrated through a lot of the sort of digital work that was being done by the right, by the Trump campaign, sort of likening Biden to, you know, Maduro's administration, the socialist administration, which is wild. Just so to be clear, I helped to get, you know, Bernie Sanders endorsed by the Center for Popular Democracy, right? So I know a socialist when I see one. Biden isn't one. Like, so, you know, it's a little bit sort of ludicrous for the Trumpers and the right to have done that, but it worked. And that is the thing that I think that we really need to like dig in on, because if it worked with our folks, if they were able to have culturally competent messages into our communities and it was able to impact the voting trends, then we're not doing our jobs. And so I just want us to be able to take stock on that. We know where the Republican Cubans are at. That is no mystery. That's happening cycle after cycle. But the misinformation that was perpetuated by the other side was, you know, well done, culturally competent again. And there was not a really sort of stable pushback from our end, from, you know, frankly, like either the IE side or the coordinated side, which means campaign versus non-campaign. So that was scary to me. And so for me, one of the things that was sort of critical is like, how are we sort of naming the lies, but doing it in a way that all the messaging has proved is effective. Here are a couple things you don't do when people are perpetuating lies. You don't talk about the lie, right? You don't name the lie, because in the world that we live in, when you do that on social media, that indicates to their algorithms that what they're saying is working. And so they put more money in there and they continue to perpetuate that lie. And so we add into that cycle when we're like, no, this is not true. You don't do that. So we created, you know, a digital ad strategy that was based on not naming the lie, but bringing in the things that we had seen through testing, through message testing, that helped Latinos feel like they could come out to vote. We got rid of the fear. We said, we can do this. If we want and believe that we can do this as a community, we can make it happen. And this is such an important election that we have to come out as a community. So you both add the sort of urgency, but you sprinkle in a lot of the positivity and the sense of community and family that really sort of resonates with us. And you don't name the lie. You say, there's something going on over there. There's a circus over there. No te preocupes. We got this. We're going to make this happen.
I mean, look, I would have to say, you know, right now I'm based in Georgia. I've been staying with my family since the beginning of the pandemic here. I've been watching the political ads here, nothing compared to like what goes on in New York. I mean, what I was witnessing was really straight up propaganda. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe that these guys are going on and on like this. Like, and so that's, you know, I do find it a little difficult, like to say, oh, that's happening over there. You know, this is really what's going on. I don't know, you know, because like, even for example, and I always give examples of my own family and my own friends, you know, I have folks who, like a very good family friend, she's married to a Venezuelan, and you know, a lot of his family have come up to the United States. Many of them are applying for asylum. You know, they have confronted their own issues, right? And we all have to like kind of, you know, recognize, right? There's a lot of political upheaval going on in Latin America, right? And those issues do get brought into the political dynamic here. And so, you know, how do we kind of bridge that as we're talking about what's happening here while people are also really concerned with what's happening back home and the role that the United States may have, you know, in their native land's politics.
I think
there's a few things there, just to backtrack a little bit, because I agree with you, Natalia. Florida is just a special kind of animal. It's, you know, the kind of thing that just, you know, you just have to shake your head. And I lived in Florida. I landed in Florida when I first came here from the Dominican Republic. I go there many, many times a year, maybe not so much this year. Lots of family there. It's a different kind of animal than anywhere in the country, and we just haven't been able to crack it. But we will. We're gonna get there, and I think it's just a process. In terms of the socialist messaging, I think that was a very relevant nuance that I do want to focus on for just 30 seconds, because Natalia, you're 100% right. This type of messaging has been hurtful to our candidates this year, but frankly, it's something that we saw coming even from the statewide elections, where both Bill Nelson lost the statewide U.S. Senate election, and Andrew Gillum lost the statewide gubernatorial election. And really, you know, in talking to voters on a daily basis and through the work that we did there, which was very extensive, and even as locally, we elected a lot of Democrats. You know, we turned 3 different county boards Democratic, by the way, with a lot of Latinas in Florida. Particularly in the I-4 corridor, but we couldn't crack the statewide. And the reason is because the socialist messaging really resonated with folks in a way that was deep and wide. And so I think it's something that we need to be conscientious of and really think about strategically moving forward, how we're going to flip that narrative. And the only other thing on that I will mention before we move on to your next topic, Raquel, is also in Florida. We saw what we've seen pretty much all around the country, which is folks understood that Donald Trump was not someone we wanted to have holding the highest office of the land. And they understood that he's harmful to our community. But what we also saw in a lot of the testing, particularly on digital, is that while folks understood they didn't like Trump, they also didn't necessarily feel they had a reason to vote for Joe Biden. And so a lot of the messaging that we focused on in the last few months of the campaign was to really highlight those policies that gave people an understanding of what kind of president Joe Biden was going to be and how it would impact their lives. And I think that flipped the narrative a little bit.
I think, you know, Biden, I definitely was seeing a lot of criticism on that point, right? That Biden really wasn't doing enough to do outreach to the Latino community. And in addition to that, not really highlighting Latino leadership, whether it was at the Democratic Convention or in other instances, that he didn't really kind of use the people that he had to really do the outreach. I mean, Natalia, what are your thoughts on that? And, you know, how did, you know, community, because, you know, I know also the talk has been that really the Latino vote, the win is because there were community organizations that have been doing power building for years, and it really wasn't necessarily the party that turned out the vote.
Yeah, I mean, if I could name 2 things that I think are sort of critical. When you take a sort of short step outside of our communities and you look at young Black men under the age of 50, there's this great study done by Terrence Woodbury from Hit Strategies. 18% of Black men were going in for Trump. We're going to vote for Trump. Mm-hmm. When you correlate that and you put that in juxtaposition to the $16 million that like Trump put in on criminal justice ads on Facebook alone versus like the minimal amount that Biden did around criminal justice in digital ads. I mean, it's like we have to be able to get Democratic candidates to make the right investments early on and to play on a level field with the other side. I mean, that is just going to be critical. And I think one of the major takeaways for the Biden campaign, I think to your other point, Raquel, about the Democratic Party, I will say, you know, we represent 53 organizations and 35 states. And when you ask them collectively about their origin stories, repeatedly, time and time again, they say, we exist because the Democratic Party did not do their job. And so when we look at places like Arizona, when you even look at like, why is Texas at a tipping point? It's because the frontline organizers in Black and Brown communities weren't helicoptering in during an electoral cycle, you know, engaging in that sort of commodification of our communities, that transactional politics, you know, come out and vote, you know, for the Democrat. Why? Because that's what you do. And it actually became about a conversation and about the issues. That is the thing that transforms our communities. But that doesn't happen one election cycle. That doesn't happen 2 election cycles. That takes at least 5 or 6 or 7 and 8. And that's something that we've always had to push up against, right? People want instantaneous results, but I think we're starting to finally see the fruit of our labors actually to, you know, showing results. And so I'm excited about that, but I'm hoping that the Democratic Party starts to pay attention.
Yeah, you know, I just want to like highlight, for example, the Dominican community, right? I know the Dominican community comes out hard for the Democratic Party, especially in places like New York. I've heard a lot of really positive things going on in Pennsylvania. You know, and then I also think about the fact that like in the Dominican Republic, there has also been a huge shift at the executive level. There's a new president, a new party. There's been a movement of people going on in the Dominican Republic with the Marcha Verde and all of those things. And also, right, we've seen in Puerto Rico, right, we saw the huge number of people coming out to the streets. And then we also see in Chile, there now is, you know, a new constitution in place. You know, so there's like real movement going on in Latin America, and our communities here are very connected to what's happening there. How do we bring kind of that feeling like into our US politics? Like even, for example, I know, you know, we all know like in Washington Heights, if someone's running for political office, ellos tienen su merengue, ellos tienen su bachata. Like they have their song. And it's like, you know, I want to kind of like feel that a little bit more, that real connection, that real like understanding of how we culturally do politics.
People always ask me if I want to run for office. And I said, no, I really love being a political consultant, but one day I do want to have my own song. But to your point, Raquel, you know, and I'm sure we could all tell all kinds of stories, not just in New York, but around the country, of how our national politics is embedded into how we vote here. I will tell you that for a lot of folks who are here from Puerto Rico, especially after Hurricane Maria, that new diaspora, which has come in different waves, what's happening in Puerto Rico is very critical. For Dominicans, it has always been a big deal, you know, and that's why, for example, you mentioned Washington Heights. You, in addition to having your own merengue or your own bachata, you also got to make sure you talk to the people from the PLD, PRD, PSC, and all the different parties, right? And you have your folks in place. You got to make sure you do that mandatory trip to the Dominican Republic, and you know, use your social media to amplify. We saw with Venezuelans in Florida, right? You know, Natalia mentioned Maduro. I think this year specifically, though, we have seen, perhaps with the exception of those 3 groups of Puerto Ricans, right? Because they're still dealing with the aftermath of the hurricane, and Venezuelans because they've come in recent waves, and certainly Cubans who've you know, showed up in significant numbers for Trump. I think that the pandemic economic insecurity, and even took a front and center position to other issues. Like, for example, in the past, I think that the Latino community was very clearly defined around the issue of immigration. I think that, again, economics and the pandemic really took a front and center seat this year. And not to say that the national politics is still not important. I just think that this year was a little different because of the pandemic.
That all feels really right to me. And like, can I just say, like, this just illustrates once again the complexities from within, the sort of nuances that Democratic campaigns have just not been able to capture. I mean, like, thank God there's people like Katherine involved, Laura Jimenez, right? Like, but like, we need to see more and more of those folks, because I think you're right, Raquel, like Latinos, especially those of us, like I was born in Colombia and came here, when I was like 5, but my parents very much see themselves still in the motherland, right? So like, we are political vessels. We inherit the complexity and the politics of our homelands, right? And so that is another sort of important distinction that we need to grapple with. So there's like that sort of distinction. I know at some point we're going to talk about the gender distinction, or I hope we are.
Yeah.
And also there's a generational distinction, because, younger people are dealing with criminal justice issues in a way that is similar to the Black community. And so how are we speaking to that? And then, in the sort of the gender gap that happened, that was very firmly illustrated in this election, what about the economics? How are we talking to that?
Yeah, let's go with the gender issue, right? We know that Latina women came out in high numbers for Biden. We know that a lot of Latinos voted for Trump, that there is a divide. Please comment on that. What do you think is missing there? What are we missing? What is it that women are seeing, and what is it that men are seeing? Is it the machismo? Is it the bravado of Trump that Latino men are attracted to and support, whereas Latinas are...
Trump is the first American caudillo.
What happened? Katherine, say it again.
Trump is the first American caudillo.
Please expand on that. That's awesome.
There was actually an article in the Times a few years back, which I shared widely, and I feel that unbelievably we're talking about it again. I'll send it to you, Raquel. But that was exactly the title, I believe, Trump as the American caudillo. And it talked a little bit about the cultural idiosyncrasies that make us who we are, and certainly why a candidate like Trump has some appeal to Latino men. I think Latino women, we always just see a lot more. To your point of what is it that we're seeing that the men are not seeing, we always see more, whatever it is. But I think, there's a lot of nuances there. And, obviously there's a lot of internalized racism that we can talk about in our communities, right? As the same way as, internalized misogyny and many other factors. I think importantly, though, to Natalia's point about investment, Trump did invest in Latinos. And so he has to have some return on that investment. And I think that for our community, the nuances of nationality are important, right? When you look at Florida, for example, that's, our headache from time immemorial. Yes, Cubans came out for Trump, but not necessarily that they came out in large numbers, just that the existing electorate broke for Trump. The rest of the Latino, community in Florida came out in higher numbers than they ever have. And so I think that there really was an enthusiasm gap there. And yes, in the end, Trump was successful in Florida, but I wouldn't say that he got the Latinos in Florida to vote for him. And that's a misconception that I think needs to be corrected. And then the other thing, and I know we're going to talk about gender a little more, is it goes again to the diversity of the Latino community. When folks talk about Latinx, for example, which is how we are defining our community these days, 98% of Latinos, based on data studies, don't like the word Latinx.
Yeah, that's from the Pew Research.
They don't consider themselves Latinx, they consider themselves Latino. And if you go looking at it from a grammatical perspective, actually Latino is a gender neutral word. And there are many who will argue that we shouldn't use Latinx. Now I do, and you do, and I'm sure Natalia does as well, but we're in the minority. So it goes to the nuances of how we really need to approach our community. We need to approach our community from all different angles. And yes, gender is important, but certainly cultural background, sexual orientation and identity, and even geography, as far as where we are in the United States, need to be taken into account. And I think women more and more are playing an important role in the electorate. We've always come out of numbers. I look at districts all over the country, and I see in many of them, the majority of them, 60% of the electorate is women, 65% in some of them is women. Also older, right? Adults, people over 50. But what we're seeing now is that not only are more younger voters also getting engaged, but also women's votes are not being taken for granted. And we see that in how Black women voted for Donald Trump. We see that in how Latino women, how Black women voted for Joe Biden, and how Latino women voted for Joe Biden as well.
I mean, well, Black women came out 90% for Biden. Was Kamala Harris a huge factor in that? And how do Latinos kind of relate to Kamala Harris? I mean, when I see Kamala Harris, like in terms of my particular context, I'm like, oh, she could be like any woman from like Allerton Avenue in the Bronx. Like she's, we know so many women like her, right? Who've come out, who are, bicultural, who connects with her community, went to HBCUs, had her Divine Nine folks, back her up. I know Latino Greeks also organized to get out the vote as well. I think that, I would love to hear how folks saw her, as a candidate for vice president. Natalia.
I think it's important for us, and this is something, and I'm not into cancel culture, just I want to name that up front. I'm a little too old for it, so doesn't sit right with me. But like Eva Longoria's comments recently, and listen, I've done the sort of show junket, right? Like I know how it is. It's like you're late. It's late in the morning. You're tired, right? Like it's hard. Sometimes you can misspeak, and it could be taken completely out of context. So I just want to name that first. But it is important for us to not erase our own Blackness as a Latino community, and I think that within our own community, we are also Black women, right? We are also Afro Latinas, right? A lot of us, our sort of origin stories for our countries are very much sort of part of the slave trade story, for the Americas. And so I think that's an important thing to sort of name, because I don't think that we should differ. Like, I understand we have to get into all of our complexities, but they're also us. And so I wanted to name that. And I think Kamala Harris was just such a good, smart choice. Obviously, once again, not the person that my organization endorsed for the primary, but I think that Biden not only sort of centering her voice, as we saw happen, like how many times you see a vice president give that type of speech during the victory party, right? Like, I think that it was a very strategic and smart choice. And I think Black women, Latina women, Afro-Latina women all saw themselves represented in that, because we saw ourselves represented in that struggle. of not being heard, of not being seen. And I felt that that was incredibly powerful.
Katherine, you'd like to comment on that?
No, I agree. And look, you know, I think that there was some discontent from some Latinos about perhaps having more involvement from Latinos in the ticket. Unfortunately, there's only 2 people in the ticket, so we can't have full representation from everyone. I think Kamala was an excellent choice. I think that we are going to see great things coming from this administration. And I think we will see a lot of Latino appointments that will, you know, ensure that our communities are taken into account when all of the issues that we're facing are addressed. So the fact that there was not a Latino, which I think has been raised many times, to me is a non-issue. I think the fact that we have a female and that it's a woman of color is historic, but more importantly, it's someone who's super qualified. And at the end of the day, that's, I think, what's going to make the difference.
Absolutely. You know, I watched a documentary a few nights ago about it was a PBS show where they were basically kind of telling the story of both Biden and Trump. And you know, Biden, while I'm happy that he won and that we're going to have a change in terms of the tone and the messages that are going to be coming out of the White House, you know, he also has a lot of questionable things that happened in his past, right, as it relates to communities of color, you know, women. But I also I do feel and I do sense that he has evolved. He has evolved in his politics, in his way of thinking, in, you know, how he approaches our communities. Do you, you know, I just want to know, do you also really sense that? And do you think that we really are going to see real action on the issues that matter to us? Natalia?
I think I would quote my the lovely Maurice Mitchell, head of the Working Families Party. You know, one of the things that he has always said is that this isn't about this wasn't about Joe, right? Like it is and it isn't, right? Like it was about bringing our country back from the brink of fascism. And frankly, the endorsement of Joe Biden by organizations like mine and organizations by Working Families Party just meant that we're going to have a target that we knew would at least listen to us, right? This is what I mean about the Democratic Party sort of pinning the entire sort of notion of movement on one human being. Humans are fallible, right? Joe Biden's past around criminal justice and the 94 crime bill, I can't tell you the countless conversations that I've had with Black and Latino voters who, you know, knew about this. And one of them even said to me, I'm in jail. I was in jail for more years because of the 94 crime bill. So this is a complicated and at times problematic candidate. But let's be just very clear here. The distinction between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, it's like night and day. And yes, Joe wasn't homegrown, but Joe is going to have, Vice President Biden, now President-elect Biden, is going to have conversations and going to listen to us and work with us. That doesn't mean we're not going to pressure him. We're going to pressure him. That's our job. But he's going to do it in a way that Trump would never have. And I think that's the distinction at the end of the day that made it possible for us to support him.
You know, that also brings me to the criticisms that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez brought up also recently around, right, the gaps that the Democratic Party has as it relates to Latinos, community of color, and, you know, just connecting on issues that impact the working class and the working poor. I would really like to hear your thoughts on, you know, the commentary that AOC made, and, what, and I think that, some of her criticisms are right on that, there are areas that the Democratic Party really needs to improve.
I would agree. I think, look, we are a big tent party, right? So unlike the Republicans, we're not very disciplined with one ideology. And that's good because we embrace a process, which I think is important. And it's rooted in our values, right, of inclusion. So therefore, we're not always all going to agree on everything politically, policy-wise, or even in process sometimes. But at the end of the day, everyone will be heard. And I think that it's a work in progress to bring everyone to the table. I think the DNC over the years has made a lot of progress in reaching out to our communities. They have a lot more work to do. And I think that it's on us to keep the pressure and make sure we hold folks accountable. I think, again, one of the takeaways from this election is that our votes matter and that they cannot be taken for granted. To Natalia's earlier point about the community groups that did a tremendous amount of work, not just this year, but over the years. And look, you're 100% right. You cannot just parachute into any community and expect that people will vote for a particular candidate. This is work that has taken many, many years to engage Latino voters. And by the way, what we've seen in a lot of the Democratic circles is that we're not just talking about the DNC. I mean, there are many funders that have had a tremendous impact in this election. That actually invested in the work of outside groups, perhaps even more significantly than they did in the campaign itself. And the reason is because they know we can get the job done. So to that point, yes, the DNC has still a lot of work to do. I think the president and the vice president will have a lot of work to do, but it's on us to hold them accountable and to ensure that gets done. And whatever anyone could say, we're still going to be much better than the Republican Party about it.
I think that's totally right. If you don't mind, Raquel, to just sort of jump in on the question of working class folks, and I just want to co-sign everything Katherine just said. And I also think that one of the things that when I think about the sort of gender, what happened in this election in Latinos versus Latinas, it's a complicated question, and there's cultural impacts around, or cultural things that can be said around misogyny and machismo and all of the things, but there's also some like bread and butter issues that were left on the table. And so somehow the Democratic Party has allowed itself to be distant from the sort of working class message that really sort of was part of its inception, and has allowed itself to be labeled as this sort of intellectual elite. And so when Latino men who, through sort of cultural forces, feel like they're the ones that need to be the ones that, feed their family, are the economic sort of engines of their communities, and they find themselves out of work, and we don't have strong messages on our side around the economy, but Trump comes in and says, this is what I did, and that's all they're hearing, we're going to lose them to that message time and time again. We've ceded that ground too much. We need to reclaim it, and we got to get better about it.
Yeah, so then, that brings me to, so now we are at a point where, right, we have President Trump challenging the vote, saying that there are these quote unquote illegal votes, and bringing lawsuits all over the country, calling into question the legitimacy of this election. I want to hear from you. What do you think about his possibilities of actually challenging? And I just want to know, like, I actually watched one of the motion hearings where the attorney basically had just presented hearsay and the judge dismissed it because they had no basis to even bring it. But now there's like thousands of people who have come forward. Are you concerned about, the possibility of him not exiting the White House and remaining there? And what are groups and people thinking about in terms of moving forward and dealing with this situation?
Do you want me to jump in on that?
Sure, go ahead, Natalia.
Sure. I find Trump to be the most predictable supervillain that I've ever had to encounter, fictional or otherwise, right? I mean, it's like, that's the beauty of it, right? Like, what a narcissist's next move is going to be. We knew that he wasn't going to concede. We knew that this was going to be a drag out fight. We saw all the sort of lawsuits that were going to be coming. They've been prepping to do this since 2018. And I think what the movement finally, and I think Katherine's right. Like we tend to be on our side, we're a little bit more undisciplined. But I think one thing that we managed to get right is that we did tell people, you are not going to know the results on election night. You're going to have to be very patient. That is what we're going to have to do. And we got it right, both from the campaign side and the independent side. And that was key. And I think what we're seeing now is exactly what we knew would happen. So it's like, we need people to hang tight. We need people to be ready. And we also know that the people power is going to be a critical piece of this. And we know that there's going to be organizations mobilizing across the country and that are remaining vigilant every step of the way. And so I would say to any viewers tonight, if you don't have a political home yet, find one. Find your local union, find your local organization, find your local Democratic chapter, find your political home, because we're all talking to one another and we're putting together a game plan that you could plug into.
Yeah, so I think, just leading on that as well, right? There's a bunch of runoff elections. The Congress is in the balance, right? In terms of who exactly will be in power at the in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. And in particular in the Senate, right? We know the Senate holds a lot of power when it comes to appointing judges to the Supreme Court, and moving forward on, several different bills. And when it comes to the budget, can you just talk about a little bit about, for example, in Georgia, there's a runoff election that's happening by January 5th for both Senate seats. Right now, currently, both Senate seats are held by Republicans, and there could very well be, right, that the state really does turn fully blue, right, in both voting for Biden and voting for these two folks in the runoff, who is Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. But there's also been, for example, from the Trump and from Purdue and the other woman who's the representative here on the Republican side, Laufer, I believe is her name, calling for the resignation of the Secretary of State of Georgia, saying that, there's been illegal votes counted, that it's been illegitimate. I mean, it really has been an ongoing attack, even against their own. The Secretary of State here in Georgia is a Republican.
Well, I think one thing that we saw this election is that even before the first vote was cast, Donald Trump and the Republican apologists were trying to delegitimize the process because they knew that they were in trouble. And so lawsuit and after lawsuit was brought on with respect to a number of different issues, right? Whether it be the mail ballots or representation. At the end of the day, those lawsuits, as we've seen with many decisions already, have been thrown out. I don't anticipate that there will be a lot of victories on that front for Donald Trump and his apologists. So, it's a matter of time before we will see final results. I think in the runoff, very excited to see what happens in Georgia, and hopefully 2 new Democratic senators there. But we have to stay vigilant, because at the end of the day, it's really our democracy that's on the balance. I don't see it as necessarily Congress or the Senate or even the presidency. We are here in this country to make a better life for ourselves and our families. Whether you came from Colombia or the Dominican Republic, or if your family has been here for 600 years and you didn't cross the border, but the border crossed you. At the end of the day, we are all here for the same reason and want the same things. And, it's been a crazy electoral season. But I think at the end of the day, we will see that our democracy will stay intact. And I think we all played a role in that. And that's really the most important thing.
Thank you so much for that, Katherine. Any final words, Natalia?
I am so excited about Georgia. I'm tired, but I'm also really excited. I'm excited once again to engage the Latino vote, and really sort of figure out how we again change the sort of political landscape of yet another state. And so it's nice to be able to have a nice focus of one state, as I know Katherine can probably very much relate to. So, it's an all hands on deck moment. I think we have a real win here. And I think with the sort of broader question, I think that's right. Let's stay vigilant. Keep your eyes on the prize. Do not be distracted by the circus that is Donald Trump. We have his playbook. It's very simple. We're going to win.
Thank you for that, Natalia. And really thank you both, Katherine and Natalia, for giving us of your time here on Critica NYC. We've been focused on talking about the life, work, and politics of the Latinx community in New York City and beyond. I want to thank the Manhattan Neighborhood Network for all of their support and work in putting this show together. Thank you to Zenaida Mendez, who is our executive producer, and Freddie Pinto, who's our studio manager. And again, we are here every 2 weeks to talk about the issues that matter to us. This is for us, by us, and all of us talking about, what is important to our community. So again, thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Katherine. Please, let's talk offline. There's a lot to talk about. And hopefully, we can come together again in January. And once we know exactly who's going to be president, we can talk about what it's going to look like moving forward for the next 4 years. So thank you so much.